B is called the measures of central tendency, or measuring the center of data, and B2 doesn't have a subheading really. What we're going to do in B2 is we're going to talk about, we're still in mean, median, and mode, but we're going to talk about how we can use a table to organize our data in order to help us maybe make finding mean, median, and mode a little bit easier. And it helps us organize our information. So it's just like adding, like, okay, how can we use this table to help us instead of the list, right? Because like yesterday we had a right list of like maybe 20 numbers, right? But what if we had 100 numbers? Like, do you really want to write out all 100 numbers to like find your median? And like add up 100 numbers in your calculator? Like, a lot could go wrong just by like my thumb hits the wrong, key. So that's where a frequency table is going to come into play. So remember, we use a frequency table when the same data values appear several times. So like yesterday, one of the questions we did from the assignment, 23,000 appeared 5 times. So like the frequency was 5. So what we are going to do here is we're going to take a look at some data that's in a table, and then it will help us, like I've been saying, to get our mean, median, and mode. This is just like a zoom in part of the table. Sorry if you started writing that down. That's on the next screen. So I will recommend that you guys copy this table down, okay? So we've seen it before. We've added some columns that we haven't seen before, but the data value are all the numbers that are in our list. So in our list, I have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 11. So those are the numbers in our list. And then these are the amount of times that they show up. So 0 is in our list 5 times. That's the frequency. Number 3 is in the list 8 times. So I will copy those down, and then we're going to fill in the whole rest of the chart, but I'm going to give you a moment to copy that down before I explain the other 2 columns, and I'll explain what's going down in the bottom row as well. So I do think that it will help your notes if you fully write the entire thing down. Mm-hmm. Can I keep going? So we've got 2 different columns. The order, might change, might see them in a different order, and we are going to be adding columns and having different columns like in the future when we do different stuff. So again, these are the numbers in our list of the data values, the frequency, the number of times each value shows up. Well, this cumulative frequency column helps us in 2 ways. It helps us with the mean because it helps us figure out the total number of values, but it will also help us when we get to the median. So here's how you add up the cumulative frequency column, is that you end up adding the frequencies, because cumulative is the total, right? Cumulative is everything. So we start adding up all the frequencies. So at first, I only have 5 numbers in my list, but then I've got 8 more numbers. So what's 5 plus 8? 13. So the first 13 numbers of my list are just zeros and ones. And then if I add the next numbers, there's 13 twos, so 13 plus 13 is 26. And then I've got to add 8, so that's 34, right? So I'm adding up all these. So my first 34 numbers are all between 0 and 3. Like if I listed them out, I'd have 34 values listed out at this point. And I keep adding, so when I add 6, add 3, and 50. So what this means is that there are 50 values in our list. So we're keeping adding that up. And again, that's going to help us with the median. Now, same thing, if we use the calculator, if we added these all up, we're going to have 50. So remember, sigma means sum. So the sum of all of our F values, all the frequency values, is indeed 50. So your very last cumulative frequency is the total sum. So cumulative frequency, adding up the frequency as we go along, it helps us know how many numbers are in our list. Now, the product helps us with the mean because, in order to find the mean, if I was adding this all up, I'd have to add 5 zeros, then I'd have to add 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, whatever, until there are 8 of them, all of these 2's. Like, that takes forever. So what we can do is find the product. So that's F times X. So the data value times the frequency. So 0 times 5 is 0. So I'm multiplying these two. That's why it says Fx. So you kind of can remember. Okay, I'm timesing those. And we're going to multiply the value times the frequency. So like, since I had 13 twos, if I added up all the twos, it would equal 26. So it does say product, so that should also indicate multiplication. So I'm kind of getting the total amount when I add up all the separate different data values. And remember again, sigma means sum, so I want to add all of these up to get my total sum. So what do you guys get when you add all of those up? I highly recommend using calculators. Good, 150. So that's the total amount. So remember when we do our mean, we have to add everything up. So when we add up all those products, that's like adding up all the numbers. And it's a lot quicker to do these little multiplications and add this list rather than like if I had a list of 50 numbers in it. Now, we're going to use this table. So I've got a filled out table for the other screens, but everyone's got this table on their notes. So first, to find the mode, so we're going to do the mode, then the median, and then the mean. Remember, the mode is what shows up the most, so what has the highest frequency? Technically, we could have done this one right away without filling out the other columns. But what's got the largest frequency? 2s, because my biggest frequency is 3, so my mode is 2. Shows up the most. Mode's easy, right? I think the median is the trickiest one personally, and that's what we are going to do next. So we're all good on the mode. So for the remember from yesterday, we talked about how n plus 1 divided by 2 can help us figure out not what the median is, but where it is. Because the other way is we would have to write all 50 values down and cross out until we got to the middle too, right? So what we can do instead is use this. So n is the total number of values, so this 50 is n, or the sum of f. So keep in mind that then 50 is n, because there are 50 numbers in our list. So when I do 50 plus 1, I get 51. 51 divided by 2 is 25.5. So a review from yesterday, what does that mean when it's 25.5? Yep, so that means that my median is between the 25th and the 26th numbers. So I have to figure out what's the 25th number in my list and what's the 26th number in my list. And then you do have to do a little average, adding them up and dividing by 2 most of the time. So this is where I can use the cumulative frequency column to figure that out. So the first through the 5th term are all 0. And then the 6th through the 13th term are all going to be 1. They were in order. So that means the 14th through the 26th term are all 2. You guys kind of get what I'm saying? Like if it was in order, the first 5 numbers are 0. Then the 6th number to the 13th number are all 1. The 14th number to the 26th number are all 2. So what's the 25th number? 2. And what's the 26th number? 2. Now, yes, I understand doing this is kind of tedious because we can do this in our head. Figure it out. But we do just end up with a median of 2. Just in case it's not the same and you need to, add them up, like if it's between intervals or something like that, or between data values. So our median is 2. Last but not least, we'll have the mean. Are there questions on the median, how we're using that cumulative frequency? So like the 35th through the 40th numbers in the list are going to be 4. Okay. Now I didn't copy the chart down, but you guys have the chart in your notes. So remember that the mean is exactly the same thing as yesterday. So it's the sum of all the data values over the number of data values is exactly what you wrote down yesterday. But from our chart then, the sum of the f of x is like the sum of all the values, and the sum of our frequency is the number of values, so I can take those directly from our chart. So x bar equals 150 divided by 50, so my mean is 3. So by adding that up right away, it just made this part really easy. Now we're going to hit up the stat box, but that's it for the example or for the notes really. So are there any questions? So this one's really an opinion question. Whatever you think is the hardest value to find, it's up to you. Maybe explain why it's hard to find so then you can kind of take that as a note of, okay, this is something I have to remember, I have to work on. For me, it's just, like I said, it's that median because we're trying to visualize these numbers in order in a list without writing all 50 of them out, or however many. All right, this is the assignment for 20B.2. I do want to see that you guys are doing these by hand, so I want to see the tables on your assignments when I check them on Friday. we are going to move right into the 10B.3 notes, but are there questions or concerns? Anything I should go back to? Yes. The 10B.3 notes, we're actually not going to do any examples because the examples will be the exact same that we just did. You're going to do the mode, the median, and the mean the exact same way. There's just a little wrinkle that we got to talk about first. Another column added to our table, our table. But all of the work is the same besides that extra column. Okay, then I got to actually get out of here. And we are on to B3. B3 does have a subheading called grouped data. What does that make you think of, like data that is grouped? We talked about it a little bit, but I know we've used other words. You look like you want to say something. Okay. All right, so when we have a group, step back though. So the different setbacks for this section. But a group is when we have those groups, those classes, those intervals. It's when the data is continuous that we have to have the groups. Because when we're measuring something, we have all those values that are in between in that interval. So that's the situation. The thing is we can't add up all those little values. So when we're using those intervals, we have to use the midpoint or the mid-interval value to represent all the scores within the value. So like if I'm measuring height and I'm talking about heights from like 60 to 64 inches, what value's in the middle between 60 and 64? What? So which one's right in the middle? 62. So that's what we mean by the mid-interval value. And we'll talk more about that when we take a look at a chart. But we have to just pick the number in the middle. Now, that's not always the most accurate, which we're going to talk about next, but it will work for us to represent all the scores. So it's not going to be super exact, but it's going to be close enough or appropriate enough to still use. So, like I was saying, when we find the mean, we assume that the scores within each class are evenly distributed. So the mean is approximation of the true value. In order to be exact, we would have to know every single value. So that's what I was getting at. It's like it's not perfect, it's not the exact average, but it will give us an approximation. Our average would be about that much. Because like we don't know, like in that group from like 60 to 64, maybe like most of the people are only 60, 61 inches and only one person 63, so like 62 might not be the exact middle in reality, but it'll be a close enough approximation for us to still calculate like the average with that. So what we're going to look at next is a chart with that column of midpoint added and like how we use it. But again, we use it the exact same way that we just talked about in our previous notes. And we can talk about strategies to find the mid-interval value. Okay, so I don't know if you necessarily need to write this down. I mean, write this down if it makes sense to you. So here's our chart. Now, instead of having discrete data, like on the last example, it was just those numbers, 0, 1, 2, we have an interval, we have a range, we have a group, a class, whatever you want to call it. So in this case, our intervals are years, so 21 to 25, 26 to 30, 31 to 35, and so on. Notice again that our intervals are all equal, right? We had talked about that, I think, on Monday. So our intervals are all equal. We still have the same frequency column, just like before. So remember, we get that by tallying. So when we did all the tallying, there were 11 people that were between 21 and 25 years of age. 14 people between 26 and 30. So we don't know like if they were 28, we don't know if they were 27 or whatever, but we know that 14 people fall in that interval. So then the midpoint we get, it's in the middle of the range, or in the middle of the interval. So like between 21 and 25, the middle number is 23. Last hour asked like for some strategies to find this, and to be honest, I usually just count, and it's one of those things that I sometimes even like count on my fingers to make sure that it's in the middle, that it's like the middle number. It's just something that I naturally do. A couple of other suggestions for finding the middle number, like if you're really struggling, you could always write it out, and it's kind of like, you know, finding the median almost. If you really have to, okay, what's the middle number? Sure enough, the middle number is 23. So that's a strategy. Last hour said that you can find it, and I didn't really test this out. I need to grab a calculator, but that if you add up the numbers from your interval and divide by 2, that it's kind of like the average, but I didn't quite test it. They were just kind of playing around with that. So like 25 plus 21 is 46, divided by 2 is 23. But let's try a different one, like 46 plus 50 divided by 2 is 48. So that might work. Like if you're struggling with that, if you find the average of your numbers, that will be in the middle. So just some strategies to help you find the midpoint. Once you find the midpoint, it's the midpoint that sort of then becomes your x. So when we find our f times x, our product column, it's the midpoint times the frequency, because you know we can't times all of these numbers. We don't know which is which exactly. So the midpoint times the frequency makes up our product column. And then you can still go about like finding your modal class, and then you can still go about finding your average by that total values all added up divided by the total amount of values. Any questions or concerns with this added column of the midpoint? Have you guys ever heard of that before? Is this old news? Okay. I had never heard of it before. Okay, so now here's the question. How do you know when you need to use a midpoint? Like when you're doing a problem, how would you know, like, okay, I need a midpoint in this one? Yeah, it's continuous data. Your data is in intervals. So those would be some clues. Like if you don't have just numbers, if you have groups of data, like different, I don't like to use the word range because we're going to talk about a different kind of range, but it keeps coming up. The different intervals, the different classes. Okay, this says all, but it's 1, 2, and 3, so don't panic by it saying all, okay? It's just 3 problems. As I said, I do want you to do these 3 problems by hand. I want to see tables on your assignment.